It was just another day for the man at the center of this story. He had spent the last 3 days attending a high-profile business summit in New York, shaking hands, signing deals, and making connections that would shape his company's future. Now he was ready to head back home to London. The flight ahead promised comfort, a first-class ticket with access to one of the most exclusive VIP suites on the plane. The man wasn't just any traveler. He was someone who had worked hard to get where he was. Years of late nights, sacrifices, and relentless determination had earned him a spot among the top leaders in his industry. And yet, despite his success, there were moments when he felt like he still had to prove himself, not because of his abilities, but because of the color of his skin. On this particular evening, though, none of that crossed his mind as he walked through the airport terminal. His assistant trailed behind him, carrying documents and a laptop bag while they chatted about their plans for the week ahead. They checked in smoothly, breezed past security, and made their way toward the gate. Everything seemed normal, almost too normal. When boarding began, the man stepped onto the plane feeling confident. This wasn't his first time flying first class, and it certainly wouldn't be his last. As he entered the cabin, he glanced around, taking in the familiar luxury, plush leather seats, soft lighting, and attendants greeting passengers with warm smiles. He found his assigned VIP suite, a small private compartment tucked away in the front section of the plane, and settled in. It was perfect, quiet, spacious, and exactly what he needed after a long week. For a few minutes, everything felt peaceful. He leaned back, closed his eyes, and let out a deep breath. But peace, as it turned out, wouldn't last long. Just as the flight attendant started preparing for takeoff, a commotion broke out near the entrance of the cabin. A white passenger had arrived late, flustered and clearly unhappy. The man didn't pay much attention at first. He assumed it was just another minor delay. Planes were often delayed, and people sometimes missed their flights. It happened all the time. But then something strange occurred. The latecomer approached the lead flight attendant and began speaking loudly, claiming that he had been promised the very same VIP suite the man was sitting in. According to him, there had been an overbooking error, and the airline staff had reassigned the seat without notifying the original passenger, himself. The man listened quietly, unsure whether this conversation involved him directly. After all, he had booked his ticket months in advance, paid full price, and received multiple confirmations from the airline. There shouldn't have been any room for confusion. Still, curiosity got the better of him, so he decided to intervene, politely. "I think there might be some misunderstanding here," he said calmly, holding up his boarding pass and reservation details. "This is my seat. I've already settled in." At first, the flight attendant nodded, seemingly acknowledging his point, but instead of resolving the issue quickly, things took an unexpected turn. Rather than addressing the latecomer's complaint, the attendant shifted focus entirely onto the man. Her tone changed. It became sharper, more accusatory. She asked him repeatedly if he'd be willing to move to economy class, to accommodate everyone. To say the request caught him off guard would be an understatement. Move to economy? For what? He hadn't done anything wrong. He had followed every rule, paid for his ticket, and shown up on time. Yet here he was, being asked, no, pressured, to give up his rightful place for someone else. Someone who hadn't even arrived until now. As the situation unfolded, other passengers began to notice. Some craned their necks to see what was happening, while others pulled out their phones to record the scene. Whispers filled the air. Was this really happening? Why was the man being singled out? Despite the mounting tension, he kept his cool. He explained again that he had documentation proving his seat assignment, and reiterated that he saw no reason to move. But the flight attendant wasn't backing down. Instead, she called over another crew member who echoed her suggestion. Before he knew it, the entire interaction had escalated into something far beyond a simple seating mix-up. And that's when things went from bad to worse. In a moment that left everyone stunned, the man was physically escorted out of the VIP suite, not by security but by the flight attendants themselves. They insisted it was temporary, just until they could sort things out. But the message was clear. Regardless of proof or protocol, he wasn't welcome in that seat anymore. Standing outside the cabin, clutching his carry-on bag, the man felt a mix of emotions: anger, frustration, disbelief. How could this happen? Why had he been treated this way? All he wanted was to sit in the seat he had paid for, the seat he deserved. But instead he found himself standing alone, humiliated and determined to fight back. Little did anyone know this incident was only the beginning of a chain reaction that would shake not only the airline but also the entire aviation industry. What happened next would leave people questioning everything they thought they knew about fairness, accountability, and justice. The man stood there still processing what had just happened. One moment he was comfortably seated in the VIP suite, and the next, he was being asked, no, forced, to leave it for someone else. It wasn't just about the seat anymore. It was about respect, fairness, and how people are treated based on assumptions that shouldn't exist in the first place. As the latecomer took his spot in the VIP suite, the man couldn't help but notice the smug look on the other passenger's face. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of the awkwardness of the situation. Instead, the latecomer simply leaned back into the plush leather chair, as if nothing unusual had occurred. Meanwhile, the flight attendants who had escorted the man out of the suite were now busy pretending everything was fine, bustling around, like nothing out of the ordinary had happened. But the passengers nearby weren't so quick to forget. A middle-aged woman sitting across the aisle glanced at the scene with a mix of confusion and disgust. She whispered something to her husband, shaking her head. A young couple seated a few rows away exchanged glances before pulling out their phones to record what was happening. Even the pilot poked his head out of the cockpit briefly, looking curious but ultimately saying nothing. For the man, standing outside the cabin felt surreal. He had never imagined something like this could happen. Not to him, not here, not in this day and age. He had worked hard to build a life where he didn't have to deal with moments like these anymore. Yet here he was, facing blatant discrimination in one of the most public settings imaginable, an airplane full of strangers. He decided to speak up again. Calmly but firmly, he addressed the lead flight attendant. "Can you explain to me why I'm being treated this way?" he asked. "I've shown you my reservation, my boarding pass, everything proves that this is my seat. So why am I being moved?" The response came quickly, but it was anything but satisfying. "Sir, we're trying to accommodate all our guests fairly," the flight attendant replied, avoiding eye contact. Her tone was clipped, almost robotic, as though she'd rehearsed those words countless times before. But the subtext was clear. Fairness didn't seem to apply equally to everyone on this flight. The phrase stung. Fairness? Was it fair to prioritize one passenger over another based solely on convenience or worse, bias? The man knew deep down that this wasn't about fairness at all. It was about power dynamics, privilege, and the unspoken rules that often govern how people of different races are treated in spaces like this. Determined not to let the situation escalate further, he stepped away from the plane momentarily. He needed space to think, to breathe, and most importantly, to figure out his next move. As he walked toward the gate area, his mind raced. Should he demand an explanation from the airline staff on the ground? Should he file a formal complaint once he landed? Or should he take matters into his own hands right then and there? What he didn't realize yet was that the story was already spreading faster than he could have anticipated. Passengers who had witnessed the incident were sharing videos and photos online. Someone tweeted about it, tagging the airline's official account. Others posted stories on Instagram, describing what they had seen in vivid detail. Within minutes, social media platforms began buzzing with outrage. Back inside the plane, the atmosphere remained tense. The latecomer in the VIP suite seemed oblivious to the whispers and stares directed his way. Meanwhile, the flight attendants tried to act as though nothing unusual had happened, but their body language betrayed them. They avoided making eye contact with passengers, their movements hurried and nervous. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on anyone. Here was a man, a successful professional with every right to be on that flight, who had been removed from his seat because of a supposed error. And yet, the person benefiting from this error hadn't even arrived on time. It was a textbook, Example of how privilege can sometimes override logic, fairness, and basic human decency. As the plane prepared for departure, the man made a decision. He wouldn't stay silent. This wasn't just about him anymore, it was about sending a message. If airlines could treat someone like him, a person with resources, influence, and proof of purchase, this way, then what hope did others have? People who didn't have the same platform or ability to fight back deserved better. Everyone deserved better. With that thought in mind, he pulled out his phone and began typing. What started as a simple post quickly turned into a detailed account of what had happened. He included screenshots of his booking confirmation, photos of his boarding pass, and a brief description of the events leading up to his removal. Before hitting send, he paused for a moment, rereading his words carefully. Then, with a deep breath, he pressed publish. Little did he know that single action would set off a chain reaction unlike anything he could have predicted. Within hours, his story would go viral, sparking debates, discussions, and demands for accountability. The airline would scramble to respond, issuing statements that only fueled more anger. And somewhere along the way, lives would change, including his own. But none of that mattered right now. All that mattered was the truth, and the truth was this. No one should ever have to experience what he had gone through, not on a flight, not in a workplace, not anywhere. For now, the man stood quietly watching as the plane taxied down the runway without him. He didn't feel defeated. Instead, he felt a strange sense of resolve. Something big was coming, and he was ready for it. The moment the man hit post, his story began to spread like wildfire. It started small, just a few likes and comments from close friends and colleagues who knew him personally. But within minutes, strangers began chiming in. People scrolled through their feeds, paused at his post, and felt a mix of emotions: anger, disbelief, and even sadness. How could something like this happen in 2023? His words resonated deeply because they weren't just about him. They were about all the times people had been treated unfairly based on their race or appearance. His story wasn't unique. It was painfully familiar to many. For some, it brought back memories of being overlooked for promotions at work, ignored by customer service staff, or judged harshly in public spaces. Others saw themselves in his shoes, imagining how they might have reacted if they'd been in his position. Within hours, hashtags began trending. Or REAR, Stand for Justice, or No to Discrimination and Accountability, now flooded Twitter and Instagram. Influencers with millions of followers shared his post, amplifying his voice far beyond what he could have imagined. Journalists picked up the story, too, writing articles that dissected every detail of the incident. News outlets around the world ran headlines questioning the airline's policies and practices. By morning, it seemed like everyone, from tech executives to celebrities, was talking about what had happened. The airline, however, wasn't ready for the storm that was coming. At first, they tried to downplay the situation. Their initial response came late at night, almost as an afterthought, a short statement posted on their official social media accounts. "We regret any inconvenience caused by this unfortunate misunderstanding," it read. "Our team is committed to ensuring all passengers receive fair treatment." But the word misunderstanding struck a nerve. To many, it sounded like the airline was trying to brush off the issue rather than taking responsibility. Comment sections exploded with criticism. "This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was discrimination," one user wrote. Another added, "If this is how you treat your paying customers, then you don't deserve anyone's business." Thousands echoed similar sentiments, calling for boycotts and demanding answers. As the backlash grew louder, the airline scrambled to respond. They deleted the original statement and replaced it with a longer, more apologetic version. This time, they acknowledged the gravity of the situation and promised a full investigation into what had happened. But even that didn't satisfy the growing crowd of critics. People wanted action, not empty promises. They wanted accountability, not vague assurances. Meanwhile, the man watched everything unfold from afar. He hadn't expected his post to gain so much traction so quickly. At first, he felt overwhelmed. Notifications poured in nonstop. Messages of support, questions from reporters, and even direct messages from others sharing their own stories of discrimination. Some thanked him for speaking out, saying his courage gave them hope. Others urged him to keep pushing for change, knowing that his platform could make a difference. Despite the chaos, he remained calm. He knew this wasn't just about him anymore. It was bigger than that. This was about shining a light on systemic issues that needed to be addressed. And while part of him wished he could step away from the spotlight, another part understood that staying silent would only allow the problem to continue unchecked. He decided to lean into the momentum. Over the next few hours, he responded to questions from journalists, granting interviews to major news outlets. In each conversation, he emphasized the same points: fairness, respect, and the need for systemic change. He didn't want pity or sympathy. He wanted action. "I'm not here to villainize anyone," he said during one interview. "I'm here to highlight a pattern of behavior that needs to stop. If we can use this moment to create real change, then maybe something good can come out of it." His measured tone and clear focus earned him even more respect. People admired his composure, especially given the circumstances. Instead of lashing out or seeking revenge, he approached the situation with grace and purpose. That made his message all the more powerful. By the end of the day, the airline's stock price had plummeted. Investors panicked as calls for boycotts intensified. Online booking platforms reported a sharp decline in reservations for flights operated by the airline. Employees posted anonymous complaints on workplace review sites, claiming that discriminatory practices weren't uncommon within the company. Former staff members came forward with stories of bias and favoritism, adding fuel to the fire. Amidst all the noise, one thing became crystal clear. The man's story had struck a nerve. It wasn't just about one bad experience on a flight. It was about exposing deeper flaws in the system. People were tired of excuses. They wanted transparency, accountability, and proof that companies cared about doing the right thing. And yet, despite the mounting pressure, no one could have predicted what happened next. 5 minutes after the plane finally took off, with the man no longer on board, an email landed in the inboxes of every crew member involved in the incident. It was brief but brutal. "Your employment with airline name has been terminated effective immediately due to violations of company policy regarding discriminatory behavior." The news sent shockwaves through the aviation industry. Never before had an entire flight crew been fired so swiftly in response to a single incident. While some celebrated the decision as a victory for justice, others questioned whether it was too extreme. Was firing the employees really the solution? Or did the root of the problem lie elsewhere, in the culture of the airline itself? For the man at the center of it all, the firings were both satisfying and bittersweet. On one hand, he felt vindicated. The airline had finally taken concrete action, proving that his voice mattered. On the other hand, he couldn't help but wonder if the real issue went beyond individual actions. After all, people don't act in isolation. They're influenced by the environments they work in and the systems they operate within. As the dust began to settle, he realized that this was only the beginning. The attention, the outrage, the calls for change, all of it presented an opportunity to push for reforms, to hold corporations accountable, and to ensure that no one else had to endure what he had gone through. But opportunities like these also came with challenges. Could he navigate the complexities of activism without losing sight of his original goal? Could he inspire meaningful change without letting bitterness take over? These were questions he would have to answer in the days ahead. For now, though, he allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. The world was watching, and he was ready to lead the charge. When the news broke that the entire flight crew had been fired, it felt like a bombshell. People everywhere, passengers, employees, and even industry experts, were stunned. No one expected such swift and severe consequences. 5 minutes after, the plane took off. Without the man who was removed from his seat, an email notification pinged on the phones of every crew member involved in the incident. The message was short, cold, and final. "Your employment with airline name has been terminated effective immediately due to violations of company policy regarding discriminatory behavior. At first there was silence. The crew members read the emails in disbelief. Some stared at their screens, unable to process what they were seeing. Others tried calling their supervisors or HR department, only to find their calls unanswered. For them, the reality hit hard. They were out of a job and there was no going back. The airline's CEO soon released a public statement addressing the firings. Standing in front of cameras during a hastily arranged press conference, he looked visibly shaken. His hands gripped the podium tightly as he spoke. "What happened on that flight was unacceptable," he said, his voice firm, but tinged with regret. "Discrimination has no place in our company or in the skies. We are taking decisive action to ensure this never happens again." While the statement sounded strong, many people weren't convinced. Was firing the entire crew really the right move? Some argued that it was too harsh, a knee-jerk reaction to save face rather than addressing the deeper issues within the airline's culture. Others believed it was necessary to send a clear message that discriminatory behavior would not be tolerated under any circumstances. For the man at the center of the story, the firings brought mixed emotions. On one hand, he felt a sense of justice. These were the same people who had treated him so unfairly, forcing him out of his rightful seat. Their actions had caused him humiliation and frustration, and now they were facing the consequences. But, on the other hand, he couldn't help but feel conflicted. He knew these individuals were human beings with families, bills to pay, and dreams of their own. Losing their jobs overnight must have been devastating for them. As the days went by, more details about the fired crew members began surfacing online. Anonymous posts appeared on social media platforms, allegedly written by some of the affected employees. One claimed they were just following orders from higher-ups, while another insisted they didn't agree with how the situation was handled, but felt powerless to intervene. A few admitted fault, acknowledging that they could have done better in handling the seating mix-up. Public opinion remained divided. Some people sympathized with the crew, pointing out that systemic problems often put frontline workers in difficult positions. They argued that firing everyone involved might make headlines, but it wouldn't fix the root cause of the issue. Others saw the firings as a wake-up call, believing that drastic measures were needed to force real change within the airline. Meanwhile, the ripple effects of the scandal continued to spread. Passengers who had witnessed the incident firsthand started sharing their perspectives online. Videos recorded discreetly on the plane went viral, showing snippets of the heated exchange between the man and the flight attendants. Comments poured in, dissecting every word, gesture, and facial expression captured in those clips. The latecomer, the passenger who ended up in the VIP suite, also became a target of criticism. Though he hadn't directly participated in the confrontation, his smug demeanor during the ordeal left a sour taste in people's mouths. For the airline, the fallout was catastrophic. Calls for boycotts intensified, with travelers vowing never to fly with them again. Competitors seized the opportunity to market themselves as more inclusive alternatives. Social media campaigns urging passengers to switch airlines gained traction, further damaging the company's reputation. Investors panicked as stock prices plummeted, wiping millions off the company's value almost overnight. Amidst the chaos, the man found himself reflecting deeply on everything that had transpired. He had never intended to destroy careers or ruin lives. All he wanted was accountability and respect. Yet here he was, watching as lives were turned upside down because of decisions made in the heat of the moment. It weighed heavily on him. He decided to speak out again, this time addressing the backlash against the fired crew members. In a heartfelt video posted on his social media accounts, he acknowledged the complexity of the situation. "I don't take joy in anyone losing their livelihood," he said, looking directly into the camera. "But I also can't ignore the fact that my experience is not unique. Discrimination happens far too often, and it needs to stop. Firing these individuals may seem extreme, but it sends a powerful message. We will not tolerate prejudice in any form." His words struck a chord with many. Some praised him for showing empathy despite what he'd endured, while others accused him of being too soft. Regardless of the reactions, his message was clear. He wasn't interested in revenge. What mattered most to him was creating lasting change. Behind the scenes, the airline launched an internal investigation into the incident. Senior executives reviewed security footage, interviewed witnesses, and scrutinized company policies. They discovered glaring gaps in training programs designed to prevent discrimination. Employees were given vague guidelines about treating all passengers equally, but little emphasis was placed on recognizing and addressing unconscious biases. Leadership realized that fixing these issues would require much more than firing a few staff members. It demanded a complete overhaul of the company's culture. As weeks passed, the initial shock began to fade, replaced by broader conversations about racial bias and inequality in the travel industry. Activists used the scandal as a springboard to advocate for reforms across airlines worldwide. Petitions calling for mandatory diversity training and stricter anti-discrimination policies gathered thousands of signatures. Lawmakers introduced legislation aimed at holding companies accountable for discriminatory practices. Slowly, but surely, the man's ordeal sparked a movement that transcended borders and industries. Despite the progress, the man couldn't shake off the lingering questions. Would firing the crew truly lead to meaningful change? Or was it merely a band-aid solution, masking deeper systemic flaws? Only time would tell. For now, he focused on channeling his energy into something positive, something that could turn this painful chapter into a catalyst for good. Little did he know, his journey was far from over. The world was still watching, waiting to see what he would do next. And as stories of similar incidents surfaced, it became evident that this fight was bigger than any one person. It was a collective battle for fairness, dignity, and equality. The man knew he couldn't let the momentum die down. The world was paying attention, and this was his chance to push for something bigger than himself. He had already sparked a global conversation about discrimination in the travel industry, but he wanted to go further. This wasn't just about one airline or one incident. It was about creating systemic change that could prevent similar situations from happening again. He began by organizing a press conference. It wasn't flashy or overly rehearsed. Instead, it felt personal and genuine. Sitting at a simple wooden table with a microphone in front of him, he spoke directly to the audience, both those physically present and the millions watching online. His voice was calm but firm as he outlined his vision for the future. "I didn't ask for this fight," he said, leaning slightly forward. "But I can't stand by and do nothing when so many others are facing the same challenges or worse, every single day. What happened to me isn't an isolated case, it's part of a pattern, and patterns like these don't change unless we demand it." With that, he announced the launch of a new nonprofit organization dedicated to combating racial bias and inequality in the travel industry. The name of the organization? Skyward Equity. Its mission was clear: to ensure that everyone, regardless of their race, gender, or background, could travel with dignity and respect. To make this vision a reality, he partnered with civil rights groups, advocacy organizations, and influential figures who shared his passion for justice. Together, they developed a series of initiatives aimed at addressing the root causes of discrimination. One of the first steps was creating mandatory diversity training programs for airline staff. Not just surface-level workshops, but comprehensive courses designed to help employees recognize and challenge their own biases. These programs would also teach them how to handle difficult situations fairly and respectfully, without resorting to harmful stereotypes or assumptions. Another key initiative focused on transparency. The man proposed that airlines implement clear policies for handling conflicts like overbooking errors or seating disputes. These policies would be publicly available, ensuring that passengers knew their rights and could hold companies accountable if those rights were violated. Additionally, he suggested setting up independent review boards made up of diverse voices to investigate complaints of discrimination and recommend corrective actions. But perhaps the most ambitious part of his plan was pushing for legislative changes. Working closely with lawmakers, he helped draft bills that would require airlines to adopt stricter anti-discrimination measures. These laws wouldn't just apply to individual airlines, they would set industry-wide standards, making it harder for companies to ignore issues of bias and inequality. Penalties for non-compliance would include hefty fines and mandatory audits to ensure accountability. The response to Skyward Equity was overwhelming. People from all walks of life rallied behind the cause, donating money, volunteering their time, and spreading awareness through social media. Influencers amplified the message, using their platforms to highlight stories of discrimination and encourage their followers to support the organization. Even some airlines, eager to rebuild trust after the scandal, reached out to collaborate on implementing the proposed reforms. Of course, not everyone was on board. Critics argued that the initiatives were too ambitious, too expensive, or simply unnecessary. Some claimed that focusing on individual incidents diverted attention from larger societal problems. Others accused the man of seeking fame or profit through his nonprofit work. But he brushed off the negativity, staying focused on the bigger picture. "I'm not doing this for recognition," he told reporters during an interview. "If I wanted fame, I'd stick to my business and avoid controversy altogether. I'm doing this because it's the right thing to do. And if standing up for what's right makes me unpopular with certain people, so be it." As the weeks turned into months, the impact of Skyward Equity became undeniable. Airlines started revamping their training programs, incorporating lessons learned from the scandal. Passengers reported feeling more respected and valued during their travels. Employees, too, expressed gratitude for the opportunity to grow and improve in their roles. Slowly but surely, the culture within the aviation industry began to shift. For the man, seeing these changes unfold brought a sense of fulfillment he hadn't expected. Yes, the journey had been exhausting, emotionally, mentally, and even financially, but it was worth it. Every story of someone being treated fairly, every policy change implemented, and every discriminatory practice dismantled reminded him why he had chosen to fight in the first place. Still, he remained humble. In interviews, he often emphasized that he wasn't a hero. He was simply someone who refused to stay silent when faced with injustice. "Change doesn't come from one person," he said. "It comes from all of us working together. My role is to shine a light on the problem and provide tools for others to join the effort. The real heroes are the people who keep showing up, speaking out, and demanding better." His humility resonated with people. They admired his willingness to share credit and acknowledge the collective nature of progress. It made him relatable, approachable, and trustworthy, a leader who inspired action rather than admiration alone. Despite the strides made, the man knew there was still much work to be done. Discrimination wasn't confined to airplanes. It existed in hotels, restaurants, workplaces, and countless other spaces. But he believed that tackling one area at a time could create a ripple effect, inspiring similar movements in other industries. He reflected on everything that had transpired. He realized that his experience, painful though it had been, had given him a unique opportunity. It had forced him to confront uncomfortable truths, both about society and about himself. It had taught him the power of resilience, the importance of empathy, and the value of using his platform for good. And while he couldn't undo what had happened to him on that fateful flight, he could use it as fuel to drive meaningful change. That realization gave him hope, not just for himself, but for everyone who deserved to live in a world where fairness wasn't a privilege, but a fundamental right. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be setbacks, resistance, and moments of doubt. But the man was ready. He had seen firsthand what could happen when people came together to demand justice. Now it was time to take the next step, to turn the lessons of the past into a blueprint for the future. Months had passed since the incident on the plane, but its impact lingered in ways no one could have predicted. The man at the center of it all had returned to his life. Sort of. Things weren't exactly the same anymore. He still ran his company, attended meetings, and traveled for work, but now there was an added layer to everything he did. Every flight he boarded, every interaction with airline staff, and even casual conversations about travel felt different. People recognized him, not just because of his professional success, but because of what he represented: resilience, courage, and a commitment to justice. The airline that had caused the uproar underwent massive changes. After firing the crew involved in the incident, they faced intense scrutiny from regulators, customers, and advocacy groups. To regain trust, they didn't stop at apologies or policy updates. They completely overhauled their internal systems. New leadership stepped in, promising transparency and accountability. They partnered with Skyward Equity, the nonprofit organization founded by the man, to revamp their training programs and implement stricter anti-discrimination measures. Slowly, passengers began noticing subtle differences: friendlier interactions with staff, clearer communication during conflicts, and a noticeable effort to treat everyone equally. For the fired crew members, life took unexpected turns. Some struggled to find new jobs in aviation. As news of their termination spread throughout the industry, employers hesitated to hire them, fearing backlash from customers or negative publicity. Others used the experience as a wake-up call. One former flight attendant enrolled in a diversity education program, determined to understand where she had gone wrong. Another started volunteering with organizations focused on racial equity, using his story to educate others about unconscious bias. Though their paths diverged, each carried the weight of what had happened and the lessons it taught them. As for the latecomer, the passenger who ended up in the VIP suite, he faded into obscurity after briefly becoming a target of public criticism. No one knew much about him beyond the smirk captured in videos shared online, but his role in the story served as a reminder of how privilege can sometimes blind people to the consequences of their actions. For many, he symbolized the systemic biases that allowed such incidents to occur in the first place. Back in the spotlight, the man continued championing the cause he had fought so hard to build. His nonprofit, Skyward Equity OIS, grew rapidly, attracting support from around the globe. Donations poured in, enabling the organization to expand its reach beyond airlines to hotels, restaurants, and other sectors where discrimination often went unchecked. Training sessions became more interactive, featuring real-life scenarios and honest discussions about prejudice. Employees learned not only how to identify bias, but also how to challenge it when they saw it in themselves or others. One of the most powerful initiatives launched by Skyward Equity was a storytelling platform. Passengers, workers, and advocates were invited to share their own experiences of discrimination while traveling. Some recounted being denied upgrades despite having valid tickets. Others described being treated rudely by staff or ignored entirely. These stories humanized the issue, reminding readers that behind every statistic was a person with feelings, dreams, and dignity. The platform quickly became a safe space for marginalized voices to be heard and validated. The man's efforts earned him widespread admiration, but he remained grounded. In interviews, he often spoke about the importance of humility and activism. "I'm not perfect," he admitted during one talk. "I've made mistakes and I'll probably make more. But I try to learn from them. That's what growth looks like. For me, for companies, and for society as a whole." Despite his accomplishments, he never lost sight of the bigger picture. Discrimination wasn't limited to the travel industry, it existed everywhere. Inspired by the progress made in aviation, he began exploring ways to tackle bias in other areas. He collaborated with tech companies to address algorithmic racism, worked with schools to promote inclusive curriculums, and supported grassroots movements fighting for equality in housing, healthcare, and employment. Each project reinforced his belief that change was possible, but only if people stayed committed to the long haul. There were moments, of course, when doubt crept in. Late at night, after long days filled with meetings and strategy sessions, he sometimes wondered if he was doing enough. Could one person really make a difference in a world riddled with inequality? Then he'd think back to the day he was removed from his seat on that plane. The anger, the frustration, the humiliation, and remind himself why he had started this journey in the first place. If speaking up could prevent even one person from going through something similar, it would be worth it. Over time, the man's story became a beacon of hope for countless individuals. It showed them that standing up against injustice, no matter how daunting, could spark meaningful change. It reminded them that courage didn't mean being fearless, it meant acting despite fear. And it proved that resilience, combined with compassion, could turn pain into purpose. Years later, when reflecting on everything that had transpired, he realized something profound. The incident on the plane hadn't defined him, it had refined him. It had forced him to confront uncomfortable truths, push past self-doubt, and embrace a role he hadn't anticipated. Most importantly, it had connected him to a community of people united by a shared vision of fairness and respect. In the end, his journey wasn't just about holding an airline accountable or launching a nonprofit. It was about inspiring others to believe in the possibility of change. It was about proving that even in the face of adversity, kindness and determination could prevail. And it was about leaving the world a little better than he found it, not for recognition, but because it was the right thing to do. As he sat in a quiet corner of his home one evening, scrolling through messages from supporters and reading updates from Skyward Equity, he smiled softly. The road ahead was still long, but he felt hopeful. Hopeful that someday stories like his wouldn't need to exist. Hopeful that dignity and equality would become the norm rather than the exception. And hopeful that future generations would inherit a world where fairness wasn't just an ideal, it was a reality.